My name is Eliza Walker. I'm 33 years old. I live in the suburbs of New York with my husband Daniel and our two daughters, Emma, who's 5, and Grace, who's 3. They are my whole world. I'm the second child in a family that always revolved around my older sister, Everly. She's 2 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she's been the center of every party, every family gathering, every compliment. If the room was a stage, she was the star, and I was the shadow in the wings. At 18, I decided I didn't want to live in her shadow anymore. Back then, that decision cost me everything. For 15 years, I kept my distance. No calls, no texts, no holidays. I built a life from scratch, brick by brick, far away from the house where I was always Everly's little sister and never Eliza. And then a month ago, everything started with one phone call. It was a regular weeknight. The girls were asleep. The house was quiet in that soft, cozy way only families understand, soundless, but full of life. I sat at the dining table, a stack of documents in front of me, lease drafts, equipment quotes, staffing plans. I was working on opening a new branch of my business, eyes blurry from staring at numbers for too long. My phone buzzed across the table. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something, habit, instinct, fate, whatever you want to call it, made me reach for it. Hello? I answered. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then a woman's voice, soft and trembling, pushed through. Eliza, is that you? I froze. There are some voices you never forget, no matter how many years you've spent trying to erase them. The way they say your name gets burned into your nervous system. Mom, I whispered before I could stop myself. Yes, it's me. Her voice cracked a little. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I just wanted to know if you're okay. I stared at the table, at the paperwork that represented the life I'd built without her, and suddenly felt 19 again. Cold, alone, holding a backpack and walking away from that house. How did you get my number? I asked, my voice dropping into something steadier, guarded. I've been keeping up with you quietly, she said. I still hear bits and pieces through some of the relatives, the ones you used to talk to before you cut ties. I never called before because you didn't want to hear from me. But this time is different. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingertips to my forehead. What's different? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Everly's birthday is next week. She's turning 35. We're throwing a small party at her place. Almost the whole family will be there. I thought it would be nice if you came too. Just this once, so everyone can see you again. Everyone. The word tasted bitter. Everyone who had watched me disappear and never asked why. Everyone who had shrugged when I walked out the door with my whole life stuffed into a worn-out backpack. I didn't answer right away. On the other end of the line, I could hear her breathing, waiting. After 15 years, now they wanted a reunion with me. The girl they'd treated like an afterthought. I'll think about it, I finally said. And then I hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand long after the call ended, the screen black, my reflection faint in the glass. My mother's voice lingered in my head, like a ghost that had finally remembered where I lived. 15 years, and she just called like nothing had happened. Footsteps padded softly across the hardwood floor behind me. Eliza? Daniel's voice came from the doorway. I looked up. He stood there in his worn gray t-shirt and sweatpants, hair still damp from his shower. He carried 2 steaming mugs of tea, but the second he saw my face, his expression changed. He stopped, the warmth in his eyes sharpened into concern. Hey, he said quietly, setting the mugs down. What happened? I swallowed, forcing my voice to cooperate. My mom called, I said. He blinked. Your birth mom? I nodded. She invited me to Everly's birthday party, next week. She said the whole family will be there. Daniel pulled out the chair beside me and sat down slowly, turning his body so he faced me fully. He didn't rush. He never does. I thought you weren't in touch with them at all, he said gently. I'm not, I replied. Apparently she got my number from a relative I used to talk to. She said she's been quietly following my life from a distance, never dared to reach out until now. The corner of Daniel's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown. And now they want you back, he said softly, because there's a party. Because it's Everly's 35th birthday, I said. Because the whole family's going to be there and they want a neat little reunion, one perfect picture for their frame. My voice came out flatter than I intended. Daniel didn't argue. He just reached for my hand and covered it with his, warm and solid. I know the pain from back then isn't easy to forget, he said after a moment. But it's been 15 years, Eliza. Maybe things have changed. Maybe they're trying to make things right. I let out a small, humorless laugh. Or maybe they just want to see whether the girl who washed cars ever made anything of herself. He didn't take his hand away. Maybe, he said. But if you don't go, will you ever stop wondering? What if things could have been different? What if they tried? What if you'd gone and it wasn't as bad as you imagined? I looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man who had seen me at my most exhausted, grease under my nails, coming home after 14-hour days at the shop. The man who never asked how many branches I owned, but always asked if I'd eaten. He wasn't asking me to forgive them. He was asking me to be at peace with myself. I've gotten used to life without them, I murmured, eyes drifting toward the hallway where our daughters were sleeping. This house, you, the girls, this is my family now. He followed my gaze, a small smile softening his features. Yes, he said, we're your family. That's not changing. But that's exactly why you can walk into that house now and stand on your own 2 feet. You're not going there as the girl they tossed aside. You're going there as the woman who built a life without them. I fell quiet. The ticking of the wall clock suddenly felt louder. Outside, car headlights slid across the living room wall like ghostly streaks of light. After a long moment, I nodded. I'll think about it, I repeated, but this time my voice was steadier. Daniel didn't push. He just lifted my hand to his lips, kissed my knuckles, and stood. I'll put your tea in the microwave if it gets cold, he said, then disappeared into the kitchen. The door swung softly behind him, and I was alone again with the quiet. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. And just like that, the memories started flooding in. The old house, the smell of food from the kitchen, the way the walls seemed to lean toward Everly whenever she walked into a room. Everly, sitting in the middle of the living room with her guitar, adults crowding around her. Everly has such talent. She was born to be an artist. This painting needs to go in the city contest. And me, little Eliza, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table, lining up toy cars my uncle had given me, quietly imagining how their engines worked. No one ever said I was creative. No one ever said I had passion. They said I was too quiet, that I needed to be more like Everly. At every family gathering, she was the star. I was the backdrop. I learned to disappear without anyone asking where I'd gone. I remember the day I got my acceptance letter to the local community college. It was for a 2-year automotive technology program. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd found my own path. Not Everly's, not my parents', mine. I walked into the living room, clutching the letter in both hands, my heart pounding. Mom was folding laundry on the couch. Dad was reading the newspaper. I got accepted, I blurted out, barely able to breathe. Into the automotive tech program. They gave me a partial scholarship, but I'll still need about $3,000 to cover the rest of the first year's tuition. I was hoping... I didn't even finish the sentence. The silence that followed was sharp and strange. Dad lowered the paper, peering at me over his glasses. Mom paused, a towel frozen in her hands, watching his face like she needed to see his reaction before having one of her own. Eliza, Dad said finally, in that firm, measured tone that never invited discussion. You know we're focusing our finances on Everly right now. She just got into an arts program in Europe. Your mother's already put down a deposit on her tuition and flights. I stared at him, the words not quite landing. What about me? I asked. My voice cracked on the last word. Mom sighed, soft, almost gentle, but distant. Everly has a big opportunity, sweetheart, she said. Well, automotive tech is something you can always do later. You can apply for more scholarships, or work for a few years and save up. You're resilient. You'll manage. Dad nodded like it was all perfectly reasonable. You can work and study, he added. That's what I did back in the day. I stood there, the acceptance letter shaking in my hand. In their eyes, what I wanted was negotiable, delayable, optional. What Everly wanted was urgent, important, non-negotiable. That night, I packed my things. One worn-out backpack, a few clothes, my beat-up shoes, $300 I'd saved from working part-time at the small garage down the road. No one asked where I was going. No one tried to stop me. No one walked me to the door. I walked out as a light rain started to fall, cold drops stinging my cheeks. I remember turning back once, just once, seeing the front window glowing warmly like a house from someone else's memory. Then I turned away, tightened my grip on the backpack strap, and kept walking. From that moment on, I promised myself one thing. I would never ask them for anything again. And 15 years later, that promise would be the one thing standing between their expectations and my peace. Life after leaving home was not some romantic movie about independence. It was cold, it was hungry, it was terrifying. In those first weeks, I slept wherever I could. on benches in bus stations, in the cramped waiting area of the old neighborhood garage when the night manager pretended not to see me, with my backpack as a pillow and my jacket pulled over my head. During the day, I walked, street after street, block after block, knocking on doors of shops that smelled like oil and rubber and metal, asking, "Do you need help? Anything. I'll do anything." Most of the time, they shook their heads. Sometimes they didn't even look up. The place I kept circling back to was Marco's Garage, a small, worn-down shop on the edge of an industrial district. I'd worked there part-time in high school, washing cars and sweeping floors while Marco's brother ran the place. The brother had retired, but Marco stayed, broad-shouldered, grease on his hands, permanent frown etched into his forehead. One afternoon, after a particularly humiliating round of no's, I slipped into Marco's garage and sank onto a plastic chair in the corner of the waiting room. Rain pelted the windows. The radio hummed quietly behind the front desk. I must have dozed off because the next thing I heard was a deep voice right above me. "Eliza." I jerked awake. Marco stood there in his dark blue work shirt, name patch half hanging off. He crossed his arms, his thick eyebrows pulled together. "You planning on paying rent for that chair?" he grunted. Heat rushed to my face. "Sorry, I was just leaving." "Sit." He pointed to the chair again. Confused, I obeyed. He took the seat across from me. For a moment, he just studied my face, his eyes drifting briefly to the backpack at my feet. "You've been coming around a lot," he said finally, "asking for work. You look worse every time I see you." "I'm fine," I lied automatically. He snorted. "You're a terrible liar." He leaned back, exhaled slowly. "I don't care who you used to be," he said. "Don't care what your parents do or who your sister is. If you're willing to work, that's all that matters here." He jerked his chin toward the bay doors, where cars sat with their hoods open like wounded animals. "I need someone to scrub wheels, clean windows, vacuum interiors, mop floors. It's dirty, it's cold, it pays just enough to keep you alive and maybe buy decent shoes. You in or not?" Something swelled in my throat. "Yes," I said, almost too quickly. "Yes, I'm in. I'll do anything." His nod was barely visible, but it was there. "Good," he said, standing. "Grab an apron. And don't whine about the water temperature. We all start in the mud." Those first months felt like one long, wet blur. Winter seeped into my bones. I scrubbed thick layers of grime off tires until my fingers cracked. I scraped dried gum off floor mats, vacuumed up crumbs and broken crayons, dragged heavy hoses across the concrete until my shoulders burned. There were days the water was so cold my hands went numb. My nose stung from the wind that howled in every time someone opened the bay doors. But every time my body wanted to quit, my mind went back to that living room scene, my parents' calm dismissal, Everly's glowing future, and my own acceptance letter crumpling slightly in my grip. I held on to that sting like fuel. I didn't complain, not once. Marco noticed. He didn't praise me, not out loud, but sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, I caught his eyes lingering a fraction longer than usual, approving, measuring. Then, one Saturday afternoon, the past walked right back into my life in heels. I was bent over the back end of a black sedan, scrubbing the rear bumper, when I heard a bright, familiar laugh ring out from the lot. I froze. That laugh didn't belong in this place, among oil stains and squeaky jacks. It belonged in polished living rooms with expensive rugs and framed paintings. My heart started pounding as I straightened up and turned. There she was, Everly. Designer coat, sleek sunglasses perched on her head, hair perfectly styled like she'd just walked off a magazine cover. On either side of her stood our cousins, Matt and Colin, the same boys who used to roll their eyes at me at family dinners and make jokes about tomboy Eliza and her silly little cars. "Well, well," Everly said, folding her arms. "If it isn't my little sister." Her eyes swept over my soaked apron, my oil-smeared hands, the bucket at my feet. "Still scrubbing undercarriages, huh?" she said loudly, making sure everyone heard. My skin burned, but I said nothing. I picked up the hose and kept working. Matt wrinkled his nose dramatically, glancing around the garage. "This place reeks of oil," he muttered to Colin. "Can you imagine choosing to stay in a dump like this your whole life?" They laughed. They didn't have to say it outright. I knew exactly who someone was. But I kept my head down, focusing on the water as it washed away thick streaks of dirt. The more they mocked, the more determined my hands became. I finished the car. I watched them drive off, Everly's laughter echoing faintly behind them. That night, as I was wiping down the tech bay floor, my phone buzzed. I dried my hands on a rag and glanced at the screen. Home, the landline number I'd memorized as a kid. For a moment, I just stared at it. Part of me wanted to let it ring. I answered. Eliza! My father's voice snapped even before the line fully connected. Why did you let your family see you doing that low-life job? My jaw tensed. I'm working honestly, I said, gripping the phone tighter. I don't steal. I don't owe anyone. I'm earning a living. Washing cars? He cut in, voice sharp. Aren't you ashamed? People will think we failed to raise you right. There it was. Not concern for whether I was cold or hungry or safe. Concern for his reputation. I swallowed hard, anger and hurt tangling together. I asked you and Mom to help me attend trade school once, I said slowly. Just a small amount to cover tuition. You said no, so now I'm doing it on my own. There was a brief silence. For a second, I wondered if he was actually thinking about it. Then my mother's voice slid into the line, softer, just as cold. You could still work and study, Eliza, she said. No one forced you to choose this path. Your father did that back in the day. You're the one who walked out. I let out a short, dry laugh. It sounded like it belonged to someone older, more tired. Then why didn't Everly have to work and study? I asked. Why didn't you say that to her? Silence again. They had no answer. Finally, my father spoke, each word clipped. Do what you want, he said. But don't expect us to introduce you as part of this family if you insist on living like this. The line went dead. No, are you okay? No. Do you have somewhere to sleep? Just a slammed door from miles away. I stood there in the empty garage, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the hollow beep. Then I set it down, picked up the mop, and kept working. About a week after that call, I was under an old pickup truck, oil dripping steadily into a pan, when Marco's boots appeared beside me. He didn't say anything for a moment, just watched. You work nonstop, he said finally. Never ask for a day off, never late. Even guys who've been here for years don't keep up like that. I wriggled out from under the truck, wiping my hands on my already ruined jeans. I just want to do my part, I said. Well? He grunted, unreadable. He jerked his chin toward another truck on the lift. That one's a V8, old transmission system. You know how to strip and reassemble it? I glanced over. Gears, bolts, metal, complexity I'd only ever seen from a distance. I've never done it, I admitted. But I can learn. For the first time since I'd known him, the corner of his mouth twitched in something almost like a smile. Good, he said. Stay late tonight. I'll show you. That night was the first time I stepped into the Central Tech Bay. Not as the kid with the mop, but as someone allowed to touch the heart of the machines I'd always loved. Under the harsh white lights, Marco taught me how to listen to engines, how to read spec sheets, how to recognize the small, strange sounds that meant something was about to fail. He showed me how to check air filters, spark plugs, brake lines, how to handle tools I'd only ever wiped down and put away before. It was nothing glamorous. No movie soundtrack swelled in the background. My shoulders ached. My feet hurt. But for the first time in my life, I felt like someone was investing in me. Over the next weeks, my days stayed the same. Washing, scrubbing, vacuuming, but my nights changed. I stayed after closing to watch the senior techs work. Marco started giving me small tasks. Removing tires, checking pressure, inspecting belts. Every time I finished something right, he just nodded once and moved on. But that single nod felt like a metal pinned quietly to my chest. One evening, when the sun had already set and we were the last two in the shop, Marco handed me a folded piece of paper. Here, he said. I opened it. It was a flyer. Community Tech School. Night classes. 2-year automotive technology program. Certification upon completion. I know the guy who runs it, Marco said. If you're serious, I'll write you a recommendation. My hands trembled slightly as I held the paper. I can pay in installments, I murmured. I'll work more hours. Marco waved a hand. I'll cover the first year, he said. Call it an investment in future staff. After that, you're on your own. I stared at him, speechless. Not because I couldn't believe someone offered help. Because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw potential worth betting on. That night, as I walked back to the tiny room I was renting behind the shop, clutching the flyer like a lifeline, I thought about what my father had said. Don't expect us to introduce you as part of this family if you live like this. I looked up at the dark sky, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and rain. Fine, I thought. I'll build a life you wouldn't recognize anyway. One day, the same people who were ashamed of my job would choke on the results of it. And I had no idea then just how literal that would become. The next 2 years of my life passed in a blur of grease-stained hands, late-night textbooks, and exhaustion so heavy it felt like a second skin. But it was also the first time I ever felt myself growing. Days belonged to the garage, washing, scrubbing, dragging hoses, doing small tech tasks when Marco trusted me enough. Nights belonged to the classroom. Diagnostics, schematics, engine theory, electrical systems, management basics. And weekends? Weekends were for reviewing notes, falling asleep over textbooks, and eating cheap instant noodles that tasted like rubber after the 10th packet. I was exhausted, but I wasn't lost anymore. 6 months in, Marco started letting me do supervised engine work. A year in, I was doing diagnostic checks on my own. By the end of the second year, the senior techs weren't supervising me anymore. They were asking me for second opinions. I graduated with my certification, missing only 2 classes the whole time, both due to winter storms that shut down the city. On the day I passed the final exam, Marco walked into the shop holding 2 cups of burnt, bitter garage coffee. He handed one to me and said, "Drink. It tastes awful, but you earned it." I laughed for the first time in days. Then he nodded toward the front of the shop where a small group of the guys had gathered. "Eliza," he announced, "is officially a certified automotive technician. So starting Monday, she's not cleaning floors anymore. She's joining the main team." The cheer that went up wasn't loud, but it felt sincere, more sincere than any praise I'd ever heard in my childhood home. That Monday, my name appeared in the official work rotation for the first time. Not as the helper, not as the kid with the mop, but as a technician. A year later, Marco approached me in the back office while I was reviewing repair orders. "You ever think about running a shop?" he asked casually, as if he were asking whether I preferred tea over coffee. I blinked. "Managing? Like a branch?" He leaned against the filing cabinet, arms crossed. "My brother's old East Brooklyn location is sitting empty. I want to reopen it. 3 lifts, 1 office. It's nothing fancy, but it needs someone solid to run it." I stared at him. "I've never managed anything before. And I've never trained anyone the way I've trained you," Marco said. "You have the drive, the skills, and more importantly, you listen. Everything else, I can teach." It felt too big, too sudden, too much responsibility for the girl who once slept on a garage bench. But I also knew opportunities didn't come twice for people like me. "I'll give it everything I've got," I said quietly. Marco clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You don't need to give everything. Just keep doing what you're already doing." 2 months later, I officially became the manager of the East Brooklyn branch. I hired 2 technicians and 1 front desk assistant. I reorganized the bays. I deep cleaned every corner with my own hands. I redid the workflow sheets, rewrote customer protocols, and replaced half the tools. The beginning was slow. Revenue trickled in, barely enough to cover rent. But people came back, because I remembered every face, every problem, every car. I treated each customer like a long-term relationship, not a transaction. By the end of the year, we weren't just surviving, we were turning a reliable profit. Marco visited monthly, checking books and equipment. Each time, he'd look around and say the same thing. "You run a tighter ship than I ever did." Those words meant more than any diploma on a wall. 3 years after I'd taken over, the Brooklyn branch wasn't just stable, it was booming. One Friday evening, after the last customer left, Marco called me to the main office. He pulled out a thin folder and slid it across the desk. "Eliza," he said slowly, "I'm planning to open a new branch on the city's north side. Up-and-coming area. Lots of potential." I nodded. "Sounds like a great move." Marco didn't smile. He didn't look excited. Instead, he looked serious, almost nervous. "But I don't want to do it alone this time," he said. I frowned. Marco took a breath. "I want you to invest. Be my partner. 50-50. For a moment, my brain went blank. "Me," I whispered. "You," he said firmly. "You're the best tech, best manager, and the one person I trust to run a shop without cutting corners. I don't need your money. I need your leadership, your skill. Someone who cares about every bolt and every customer." My throat tightened. "Take out a small business loan," he continued. "I'll co-sign." I looked down at the contract. Co-owner. My name. A partnership offer. The girl who once stood outside in the rain begging for work, now being asked to own half a shop. I met Marco's eyes. "I'm in," I said. That spring, we opened the North Side branch. Nothing fancy, no balloons, no grand opening, just a clean shop, a small team, and a sign out front. "We take care of your car like we take care of ourselves." People came slowly, then steadily, then nonstop. Within 3 months, we were fully booked every week. By the end of the year, the North Side location was outperforming the Brooklyn branch. Marco stepped back more and more. He let me run hiring, finances, marketing, supplier negotiations. One day, looking over the numbers, he said, "We could open a new location every year, and I want you leading them." It was during that expansion frenzy, long nights, missed meals, barely sleeping, that Daniel walked into my shop, or rather his car limped in. Rain poured outside, thunder rumbling overhead. He stepped out holding a folder over his head, exhausted from work, his car flashing warning lights everywhere. "Please tell me she's fixable," he said, half joking. I popped the hood. "False sensor alert," I muttered. "Loose connector, 15-minute fix." He blinked. "That's it?" A shop told me the whole system needed replacing. "I don't replace what doesn't need replacing," I said, wiping my hands. "I fix cars. I don't sell problems." He stared at me for a second. Then he smiled, genuinely, warmly. "I owe you a coffee," he said. "Black, no sugar?" I shrugged. "Works for me." The next day, he returned with 2 coffees and 2 breakfast sandwiches. "You look like someone who skips meals," he said casually. I stared at him. No one had noticed that since Marco. That was how we began. Small talk, coffee runs, him dropping by, accidentally on purpose, me pretending not to wait for the sound of his footsteps. A few months later, I asked him out. A year after that, we had a tiny backyard wedding with close friends, co-workers, and Marco standing beside me like the father I never had. When I walked toward Daniel that day, wearing a simple white dress I'd bought on sale, I realized I finally had a home, a family, a life I'd built from broken pieces, but built nonetheless with my own 2 hands. 6 years into our marriage, we had our daughters, Emma and Grace. Our home was peaceful, warm, modest, perfect. Every night, Daniel and I sat on the patio drinking tea, planning life. Should Grace move to Montessori? Should we hire another tech for the new branch? Should we add hybrid training courses for staff? We didn't talk about status or money or competition. We talked about our family. And for a long time, I thought that was enough closure, that I never needed the past to acknowledge my present. Until my mother called after 15 years. Until she said Everly wanted me at her birthday. Until I stood at the doorway of everything I escaped, ready to walk back in as someone new. The day of Everly's birthday arrived with that strange stillness that comes before a storm. Not loud, not violent, just heavy. I spent the morning playing with Emma and Grace, braiding their hair, letting them pick their cutest dresses. Daniel didn't push me, didn't ask if I was nervous, didn't question whether I'd changed my mind. All he said as he helped buckle the girls into the car seat was, "If at any point you want to leave, just squeeze my hand. You don't owe anyone anything." That was all I needed. At exactly 6:20 p.m., we arrived in front of Everly's new house. 2 stories, identical to the ones on either side, but decorated with balloons and a garland that said, I almost laughed. Everly hadn't changed at all. Still the center of her own universe. The front door was open. Laughter and voices spilled out. Too loud, too cheerful, too performative. The kind of sound that fills a room when people want to look happy, not be happy. I adjusted Emma's dress, straightened Grace's little pink bow, then took Daniel's hand. "Ready?" he asked softly. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We stepped through the doorway. The room instantly went silent. It was small, half a second, but unmistakable. The kind of silence where conversations die mid-sentence and people pretend they weren't staring. My mother was the first to react. She hurried forward, putting down a tray of pastries too quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Eliza," she breathed, as if she couldn't believe I was real. You really came." "Hi, Mom," I said evenly. "We're here." She looked past me, eyes widening slightly at the sight of Daniel, then the girls peeking shyly from behind my legs. "Oh, you brought everyone." "Yes," I said. "They're my family." As if she needed reminding. We stepped further inside. Aunt Lorraine, who once told me I didn't quite fit the family mold, approached with a tight, polite smile. "Oh, wow, Eliza, it's been so long." Her eyes slid to my daughters. "And these little ones?" "My daughters," I said, "Emma and Grace." "Oh," she said, blinking. "How lovely." Everyone watched us from the corners of their eyes, curious, wary, assessing. Not one person looked genuinely happy to see me. Not one person asked how I'd been for 15 years. To them, I wasn't returning family. I was a spectacle. Then she appeared. Everly stepped out from the dining room, wearing a silk dress, wine glass in hand, glowing like always. She was surrounded by relatives, all clinging to her like she radiated warmth. When she saw me, her smile froze for half a second. So quick, most people would have missed it. but I didn't. "Eliza," she said, recovering with a bright, airy tone. "You're here." I nodded. Mom invited me. Her eyes flicked to Daniel, then to the girls. I could almost see her tallying up judgments behind her perfectly mascaraed lashes. "Well," she said, stepping aside, "come in. Make yourselves at home." We sat near the window, not the center, not the corner. A place where I could see the room clearly, a place where I wasn't hidden, but wasn't on display either. Daniel wrapped his arm gently around the back of my chair. The girls leaned against me, quiet and observant. The perfect little reminder. I didn't come alone. I came with everything I had built. The need to show power. The party unfolded exactly as I remembered family gatherings always were. Everly telling stories, everyone praising her, nobody pushing back. She was in the middle of describing some art project on the East Coast when she suddenly turned toward me. She smiled sweetly, falsely. "So, Eliza," she said louder than necessary, "you're still washing cars, huh?" The room froze. People straightened, eyes widened. A few exchanged looks, barely hiding their smirks. There it was, the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she could remind me, and everyone else, of the low-life job she believed I never left. I didn't flinch, didn't swallow hard, didn't shrink. Instead, I reached into my handbag. I pulled out a single silver-edged business card. Vanguard Auto Centers. Eliza Walker, co-founder and CEO. I didn't hand it to Everly. I placed it on the table and slid it toward one of the guests. "Would you pass that to Everly?" I said calmly. The card began moving from hand to hand. Conversations died. People leaned in, squinting. The logo glinted under the dining room lights. Finally, my cousin Matt grabbed it. He read it out loud, confused. "Vanguard Auto Centers," he muttered. "Wait, this is a chain, right?" He pulled out his phone, typing furiously. The room went silent, except for the soft tapping sounds. And then Matt's voice shot up an octave. "Yo, guys, this is real. Eliza Walker, co-founder and CEO of the biggest auto service chain in New York State. 12 locations. She's in Business Weekly." Everyone stared at him. "What? No way. That's not... It can't be... She owns a chain?" He kept reading, his eyes widening. "It says here Vanguard is known for top-tier technician training and customer service, and she's been featured in 3 magazines." He turned toward me slowly, disbelief written all over his face. "That's you?" I nodded once. "Yes." I looked at Everly. Her hand tightened around her wine glass until her knuckles went white. Her perfectly trained smile faltered. The sister who once laughed at me for scrubbing bumpers couldn't get a word out. I held her gaze. "You're not wrong," I said softly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I did wash cars." I paused. "And from that rag, I wiped away every trace of the life you all thought I would have." Silence. Not the awkward kind. The stunned kind. The kind that fills a room when a truth so sharp slices through years of arrogance. I stood, gently lifted Grace, who had fallen asleep against me, and reached for Emma's hand. Daniel rose beside me, silent but steady. "We're leaving," I said. A few relatives opened their mouths to protest. None managed a single word. We walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, shaky and desperate. "Eliza, I'm proud of you. I mean it." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "So the first time you're proud," I said quietly, "is when Google confirms it?" And then I stepped out of that house for the last time, calm, composed, and no longer carrying the weight of their approval. The door closed behind us. The next morning, sunlight poured through our kitchen curtains in soft, warm stripes. For the first time in years, I woke up without that familiar ache of old wounds tugging at my chest. Daniel was already at the stove making breakfast, his way of grounding the house in calm. I kissed his shoulder as I passed, inhaling the smell of eggs and toast. The girls were still asleep. The house was quiet, peaceful, exactly the opposite of the chaos Everly had tried to pull me back into. I poured myself a cup of coffee. Then my phone buzzed. Once, twice, then nonstop. They'd found my number. It was printed, very clearly, on the back of the business card I'd handed out at the party. I set the mug down and unlocked the screen. Messages poured in. "Last night was just a misunderstanding. We're all proud of you. You surprised everyone. Let's talk. Your mom wants to reconnect. Everly is upset. Maybe you could have been gentler. Family should heal, not fight." I scrolled without responding. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because for the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't need anything from them. Not validation, not apology, not recognition. Daniel walked over, leaning his hip against the counter. "More messages?" he asked softly. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Ever since they found out I don't just scrub tires anymore, I murmured, they suddenly remembered how to say family. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't have to. He just slipped his hand over mine and squeezed gently. A reminder. This was my real family, right here, in this kitchen, with peeling kid stickers on the fridge and toys scattered across the living room. Not the people sending me messages out of guilt or curiosity. The final straw. The call. That afternoon, while I was reviewing launch plans for our 13th branch in Long Island, my phone rang again. Unknown number, but instinct told me exactly who it was. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Eliza. Everly's voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, stripped of confidence, lacking the razor edge she normally hid behind. I wanted to apologize, she said. Her voice trembled. But before I could respond, I heard faint voices in the background. Whispers, shuffling, a sharp inhale. They had me on speaker. I didn't say anything yet. Then my mother's voice chimed in. Eliza, sweetheart, we all want to talk. We know things weren't perfect, but we want the family to be close again. My father added, tone forced calm. Nobody's perfect. You shouldn't hold a grudge over old misunderstandings. Old misunderstandings? They called years of favoritism and neglect misunderstandings? I exhaled slowly. What do you want? I asked. Not rude, just direct. Everly hesitated. Then it spilled out. I'm struggling. One of my art projects lost its funding. I need help. Maybe you could loan me some money, about $100,000, just until things stabilize. I closed my eyes. There it was, the real reason. Before I could speak, my mother jumped in. Helping your sister is helping the family, she said, voice trembling with urgency. It's not like we're strangers. We're your people. Your people. Funny how they remembered that now. My voice came out steady, slow, sharp. No family, I said, would pour everything into one child's dreams and tell the other to figure it out alone. Silence. You could almost hear their hearts stop on the other end. My mother stammered, Eliza, back then things were different. You didn't understand. And now, I cut in, now you want me because Everly needs money. More silence. I didn't soften, not this time. If you contact me again, or Daniel, or try to reach my company for anything, I said, I'll block every number you have, and if needed, I'll involve the police. It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary, one I should have drawn years ago. My father finally snapped, bitterness dripping through the line. You should be thanking me, he said. If I had helped you back then, maybe you wouldn't be where you are today. I almost laughed. Instead, I answered quietly, Thank you, Thomas Walker. Not Dad, not Father, just the man who provided genetics and nothing else. Then I hung up and blocked the number. I stepped outside, letting the cool breeze wash the conversation off my skin. Emma and Grace were in the backyard, chasing bubbles Daniel blew into the air. Their laughter floated through the golden light of early evening. I walked to them. Grace ran straight into my arms, giggling. Emma grabbed my hand, her tiny fingers warm and trusting. Daniel looked up, smiling softly. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Better than okay. For the first time in my life, the past no longer felt like a door I had to keep opening. It was closed, peacefully, permanently. And everything that mattered was right here. Life found its rhythm again. Work was steady. The 13th branch opened on schedule. Daniel and I settled back into our quiet evenings on the patio, watching the girls chase fireflies. No calls, no messages, no shadows creeping in from the past. And I realized something. You don't need to cling to people just because they share your blood. Not when they're the first ones to cut you open. Not when they only reach out with open hands instead of open arms. Family isn't determined by DNA. Family is the people who choose you, who show up, who love you without needing you to prove your worth. And I haven't looked back once. Before I end my story, I want to ask you something. Not out of bitterness, not out of spite, but out of genuine reflection. Was I wrong to walk away from the people who share my blood? I truly want to know. If my story made you feel something, if it made you pause, think, or see your own life differently, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story. Inside, no one was laughing anymore.